What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. As promised, here we're going to go over some of the mastering stuff. Now, listen, I'm just going to say it right up front. I'm just kind of getting started on the mastering stuff, so I'm not an expert in any sort of sense of the word. But this strategy's worked pretty well for me, and I want to share it with you because a lot of questions have popped up, and people are like, man, every time I do my masters, it feels like it ruins my mix, and I know the feeling all too well, so I want to show you some of the tips and tricks that I learned just by doing these over and over and over and over again. So the first one is the relative size of your wave, file, if you will, with respect to the music. You can see they're pretty relative here, right? So now listen, this is a full-on heavy metal stuff right here, and this one here has got more acoustic guitars, and it's a little bit more friendly, if you will. So it looks smaller for sure, but don't get confused. In terms of volume, they're kind of relative, so they don't always have to look the same. And notice that I'm mixing pretty hot. So there's not a lot of room here, and that is because, honestly, with respect to me sending it to this main bus, I've dropped the volume down by like 10 dB. So the point being here is that I mix fairly loud in the sort of pre-master stage because I know I'm going to turn it down and then I'm going to run a bunch of parallel processing with it, and I'm also going to do some sort of volume adjustment with respect to the tube bus where I use this clipping and I use a compressor kind of deal. So you got to leave yourself some headroom, if you will, which is why I'm turning it down. But obviously the way I look at it, I guess you could say, is that this is like a glass of water and this is 70%. Right, and then I pour some oil on the top, the last 30% here, which makes up all of this extra stuff to make my master go from being like a pretty decent sort of flat sounding, full sounding mix to the kind of pristine master that you hear in a modern production kind of situation. So don't get obsessed with the sound as long as they sound relative. And of course, you can make adjustments here with the volumes. You can make adjustments with the send volumes. There's just so many ways of dealing with this. That really is the secret. I didn't quite understand this. So, for example, this just goes out to this main bus here, which goes instantaneously to the tube bus. So it's automatically going through this situation here. And then, of course, I'm sending it in parallel from here to all of these parallel tracks. Okay, now the trick here is this volume situation. Okay, so for track one here, I'm basically hitting this particular instrument here, this Tomo Lisa sort of multi-band compressor, which is one of my favorite tools for mastering. This thing is absolutely insane. But the thing is when I'm hitting it here, I turn the volume all the way off, and then I adjust the volume outputting from this one here going into this instrument now, so that I hit it at a relative volume here, like between usually -24 and -12. I don't like to do anything in between, like the top, whatever, let's say the top little third of the the meter or whatever it is. I like to be in that sort of sweet spot between -24 or -12. Sometimes it's -12 to -4, blah, blah, blah. Basically, you're hitting at like 60 to 70%. And you can make adjustments here for your output gain if you want to that way. You can turn it up, you can turn it down using this volume like I'm doing. You can adjust, again, the volume from here going out to the master track. Obviously, it's the same one over here. So, I mean, the gain staging aspect is massive. You can see here, I'm absolutely driving this input gain on the mid channel, but I'm doing nothing here on the side. But notice over here on the output gain on the side channel, I'm absolutely pinning it, and the output volume up here on the mid, I'm actually cutting. So it's a real delicate balance of playing with volumes, okay? You got to play with the volume. And then, of course, it's about selecting various sort of tools, if you will, to accomplish what it is that you want. In this case, this thing is basically shaping the sound and adding an insane amount of top end, which is necessary for a modern sounding mix. Trust me, I played mine originally. I was like, it sounds pretty damn good in the headphones, but as soon as I put it up against something else, I was like, that does not sound good. Especially when I ran it through the speakers, I was like, that really doesn't sound good. Don't get confused. You cannot master on headphones. You have to run it through the big speakers. There's no chance, there's no sort of if, ands, or buts about it. And if you have a smaller set of speakers, like anything less than 6 inches, and even 6 inches is going to be questionable, you're going to have to do the old car test. You're going to have to do the car test anyways, but if you have 6-inch speakers or less, you will absolutely have to test every single mix, at least for one song, until you get happy with the sort of like the configuration in your car to make sure that it sounds right. Or if you have like a stereo setup with a receiver and some decent speakers and stuff like that, you can do it that way too. But honestly, the car test tends to be the sort of gold standard, if you will. Don't ask. I don't know why. It just is what it is. But if you want, the kind of mix that's going to translate and stuff like that, you have to understand that the high-end stuff, and you can see I'm just absolutely nailing it here. I've maxed them out. Now, in this case, I've driven the compression on this one particular channel way high too, but on this one, it's completely off. That's why I like this particular processor here, because you have total control over both sides of one, the mid, obviously, and the other one, the side, and it just makes a monster-sized difference. Almost everything you're going to do at this stage is going to be in mid-side. It just sounds better. Now, there could be a few sort of instances where you'd be wanting to do it in stereo, but my sort of like general impression is that working in mid-side during the mastering stage is way more useful than you would think. So just food for thought. Don't make my mistake of constantly mixing in stereo all the time and then all of a sudden realize your mixes were suffering because all you had to do was push this button here and break, obviously, the parameter links. You do not want to do these together, linked. You want to mix this mid on sort of one and then mix the side as something else. And then I would just do them by band. So work through the low band, do the high band, or vice versa, and then do the low and then do high, and then sort of work inwards afterwards to sort of get everything up to snuff, if you will. So that's a big one. And really the biggest sort of tip that I can give you is this manipulation of volume for the input, for the output, whether you're adjusting these input gains or output gains, depending. If I like to do it here, you know what I mean? And you can clearly see it here. I've got these things basically all sort of teed up essentially as necessary to get the gain staging proper, right? Except in certain instances, you can see here with this parallel widening, I'm barely touching it because obviously the thing with the widener here is I have it absolutely maxed. It is just driven to all hell. So my mix is already pretty wide. But when I put it up against a professional mix, I'm like, it's not exactly wide enough. So I was like, I guess I have to add more widening. But then when I did it and I started messing with it like I would normally do, it sounded absolutely awful. So I was like, that's it. Just absolutely pin the stereo widening and find like the best sort of like, general configuration, which this is what it ended up being. And of course, I brought down the output volume again, just to reach sort of, some gain staging here with respect to the metering, but then just drop the volume of these instruments, the tracks themselves going down like massively. But of course, again, notice I'm actually pumping it here with going to the master 2 track, but going as the input volume into the actual stereo widener is way low. So again, you're starting to see this weird conundrum develop where it's like, okay, there's about 4 different volumes at play here. There's this volume that goes into the actual widening itself, driving this meter. There's the volume coming out of it. Then there's the volume going to the 2 bus. So playing with all 3 of them is what gets the results, right? So this Tomo Lisa here does a lot of work with respect to the high end, the low end, and stuff like that. You can see this low boost here. I'm just absolutely, again, doing the same trick here. Just absolutely drive the low end boost, but then do extreme compression on it. I'm using the fast attack and fast release here, the master threshold set relatively kind of deal. And you should just see the attenuation sort of like bouncing a little bit. Sometimes it's more extreme. I mean, you got to use your ears kind of situation, but you know what I mean? Like, you'll know when you're doing it right and whatnot. And then I just start basically dialing everything in. I don't do any of this extra stuff until the very end. Find the sweet spots with respect to the frequency ranges. Work top to bottom or bottom to top, however you like to do it. By frequency range kind of thing. So don't just do the entire mid and then think you're going to zip down here to the side. Do the mid and the side one at a time for the low boost, done. Then move to the high boost and do that. So you're like, okay, low end's right, high end's right, and then start messing with the ones in the middle. These ones are going to be way more crucial than this because obviously this is only being brought in a little bit. Again, most of your mix is already done. You're not really doing more mixing. That's why I don't add all this stuff on this one particular channel and be like, oh yeah, no, just add a whole bunch of stuff here. No, I don't like that. It just makes it sound worse. In my opinion only. Everybody has a different workflow, but that just does not work at all, right? So that's why I have it like this, because it gives me insane levels of control over how much I'm going to bring in of this. And then it lets me get extreme with the settings, so I can just take and rail at 24K, the high boost, right? And then just dial in how much of this signal is now going up here to bring out that high-end shimmer, right? Makes sense? Next here is parallel compression. I'm using this Elysia Alpha. This is a really great compressor. This is basically beefing up my mix. And as you can see, again, I'm hitting it pretty hard here because I want to see, you know, the compression factor. I don't want massive compression. As you can see, I'm barely actually adding any threshold here on the mid, but on the side, I'm absolutely, definitely compressing more. Again, everything I'm doing here is in mid-side. You can see it's in mid-side mode. So incredibly important to understand that basic concept, because that's the real sort of secret to getting a really tight master, is working on the mid and working on the side independently after you have a good stereo mix. Okay? Done. So this one here is just basically adding low end and sort of oomph, if you will, to the mix. And that's why I had to turn it way down. I used to have this way higher in the mix, and it sounded absolutely blistering in the headphones. And then when I put it on the speakers with the 8-inch speakers, man, my mix died instantly. I'm like, man, that is way too much bass. And there's nothing you can do besides turn it down, right? So I turned it down, and then of course it fit into the mix perfectly. And I was like, this is great. So that's an absolute win. Here, of course, again, we just did the parallel widening. Again, I'm just adding a tiny bit of extra width. I'm not really trying to make a massive alteration to how wide the mix sounds. I'm just adding that extra little bit, the tiniest amount, especially considering I'm doing a little bit of EQing down here. I'll talk about that in a sec. And that makes a huge difference. And last but not least, I'm using this mag sort of mastering EQ. I'm mostly using it here for the airband. Okay, as you can see on, in this case, the side channel, I'm absolutely just nuking it at 40K. 8 dB at 40K, right? So there's no more games, kid. We're just going to town. Whereas, you know, on the other one here, on the mid channel, I'm actually kind of really hitting it at 10K. So again, this goes to show you this really awesome dynamic that you can develop, where you're like, it sounds much better on the side channel when I do 40K, but 40K over here sounds awful. But once you dial it into like 10K Well, all of a sudden, that's when the magic happens. And then, of course, you just adjust as necessary. This is a great EQ. It's relatively inexpensive. Works awesome on the master, by the way. And you're good to go. And you'll see that I also have this spectral sort of compression here. This is just because when you start combining all of these things together as a whole, you're going to run into frequencies that start to clash. So there's certain aspects about this thing. You can see I'm doing a big cut here in the sub on the mid channel, but I'm doing a boost on the side channel. And then what I do is marry the two of them up here by doing this. And this also helps me balance out these four sort of extra flavors that I have in reference to the mix, right? Once I get done all of that, imagine that none of this stuff was on here this last little bit. I come down here and I add myself the final sort of EQ, which is got to be something like the Kirchhoff, whatever it is, and or the, there's a couple other ones in there that are really, really high end. You know the one, Fab Filter is another big one. And I like to use this to just perfect the sound. Like obviously here at 56 hertz, and you'll notice some things here about this stuff. You'll notice that these things basically start to line up almost perfectly on a specific spot. At about 56 hertz here, the kick drum was just taking my face off. So I dialed it back because you can clearly see I've got this big sort of like bell happening, right? And then of course down here, the magic is in the mid-range, baby. So with respect to the metal stuff, this whole section here, and of course, this one comes with this ultra amazing sort of dynamic section, dynamic section. There we go. I got it out. You know how it is. And then of course, this is going to make your mix just sound absolutely punishing. But obviously, if you just do this big jump like this without the dynamic compression, you're going to run into problems. That's why you need to have this extra little stage, and this thing only shows up in the high-end ones. So it is what it is. I've seen this one on sale a few times. Like, it's still $100, but trust me, it's $100 very well spent. And again, you notice they have the emulations here. I'm using the E-Type from the SSL. There's another E-Type there. This is like a Neve one. Notice 800 hertz. Notice this one, 250. Right? Notice this one here. This one's a little stranger. It's just, basically a touch over 165, so on and so forth. So I think you get the idea. Now, originally, I had a cut here, and I listened to it through the headphones. I'm like, it sounds awesome. And then I listened to it comparably to another mix, and I'm like, there's no way there's enough high end there, even after I destroyed it with the Lisa, and I also added tons of high end with the Mag. I had to add more high end just with the EQ on the exact track, so that when I listened to it through the big speakers, I was like, okay, that's the proper amount of high end. Do not get confused again. Headphones, unless they're $400 or more, and honestly, a good set's $500, a really good set's $1,500, and the Cadillac ones are about $5,000. So just in case you're wondering about the spread there, they get expensive insanely fast, but you can get away with the $500 ones. You could probably even master on those, but I wouldn't even really consider it unless they were the $1,500 ones. And yes, it does matter. It's not like you're just paying for the name. You're actually paying for some real major level innovations with respect to how it works. So food for thought. I did a lot of research on it, so you can take my word for it. But again, listening to it on the speakers is what made me take it from the previous one, which is down here, because I just copy them down. Oops, of course, it's not the right one. I was messing with that earlier. Let's get that. This will be on the third one here, because this is a 17-minute song. You can see I was doing a dip here. I was like, oh, this sounds better when I take this off. Sounds too crispy in the headphones. Guess what? Fail. So I had to completely change it and go back and do a big jump here at around 20K. So in this case, it was actually around 16. So there it is, kind of deal. This happens at the very end. You don't do any of this stuff before. This is the final stage, right? You do everything else before, meaning what you're going to do is basically this is all off. You're going to gain stage all of these instruments. So you're going to start dialing in how much of this track, if you will, and if you only have one track, you're only going to have one of these, of course, goes into here. Okay? How much of it is now hitting this instrument, and then just control the output as necessary, either here or by turning the track itself down. That's number one. Then once you get all of these basically set at 0, you're not actually even mixing anything. You're not turning a single knob. You're just putting the plug in on there and just running the track through it. It doesn't even matter if it sounds good or bad. Dial it in until it does sound decent. Okay, for each one, you're like, okay, here's my low end, boom. I'm going to dial it in. In this case, it would be between probably -6 and -4 is where I want my sweet spot to be. Then the next one here with the stereo widening is probably going to be significantly lower. It'd probably be only about maybe 40%, because this is the least important part of the entire mix. All it's really doing is giving the impression, the interpretation, if you will, that the mix is wider. And it is a little wider, but really if you turn it on and off, it's very, very subtle. It's just that subtle factor makes a monster difference. And of course, last but not least here, I'm going to dial it in again. In this case, it'd be like between -12 and -4. Again, I want to be in that like 60 to 70% range there, and then just match afterwards, because I want to control the volume over here. So I want to make sure that the input gain and the output gain on this thing basically match up in that instance, which is why you're seeing me manipulate the output gain here and then driving the full volume part, if you will, that goes to the 2-bus proper. Again, a delicate dance of volume adjustments. After you get done that, you're going to then start basically bringing, I would mute these in, bring this in, mix it up, right? Get it somewhere relative. Bring in the next one, mix it up, right? Be like, okay, these are the best settings. It sounds pretty good through there. With what you want to do in mind, you're like, I kind of want to beef up the low end. So when you're doing this, you're like trying to actively create a more sort of substantive low end. Then you're going to bring them both together and mix them in. Then you're going to do the widening. That's probably going to be at the very end, of course. You're going to add in this sort of top end sheen. Again, people are like, well, you're already doing the top end with the Lisa, and it's like a little bit different. This is just, there's no compression here. I'm just adding a massive shelf basically to the mix. But this one, I'm adding a shelf and then selectively compressing various frequency ranges, some of them pretty extremely, right? Look at this one here, the high mid, I've just destroyed it. So again, something I didn't quite understand all that well. This thing is sort of allowing me to focus in on those really crucial frequency bands to just make them sound absolutely pristine. And of course, at the very end, you're going to bring them all in and make subtle adjustments to each one. Obviously, after you get everything brought in there, you got the volumes done a little bit. That's when I like to bring in this stuff here, and I start making some cuts again, just to control the overlapping frequency ranges, because it's starting to compete with some of this other stuff. That's the next stage. More gain staging a little bit, you know, maybe a few adjustments to some of the knobs. Oh, okay, a little bit too much high end here. But honestly, after I dialed it in once, I was like, it's not going to get better than that. It already sounds as good as what I'm going to get. It sounds great just on the mix, and then just dialing it in a bit more just takes it over the top kind of situation. Remember, it's a combination of flavors here. It's like a cooking situation. You can add salt and it'll make it sound better, but if you add salt and a few other spices, it'll take it from being like, yeah, it's pretty good, to like, wow, that's amazing. And of course, last but not least, I'm going to then bring in this EQ stage here to absolutely sort of bring it to fruition. But the thing is before I would do that, I want to make sure that I've got myself set up here with the overall volume. Again, this is the absolute last part of the master. This right here, this is just the fine tuning, if you will, of each one of these little tracks, if you will, to really bring it to like top end status. So of course I'm going to set the clipper. Notice I am not doing anything extreme here. Nothing. I don't want to do massive amounts of clipping, and I don't use limiting, because I find that it just absolutely destroys your mix, and my mix is already really dense, so I don't need limiting. I don't do like serial limiting or anything else like that. I use this one compressor, and I'm not even compressing it that hard. Now, in this case, I am kind of hitting it a little harder here comparably to the mid side, but honestly, it's really, really light. And again, you can see the threshold is almost nothing, because you're getting the same effect with limiting by just adding more volume with respect to this parallel compression. So, you know, it's one or the other. If you're like, okay, that's my mix, and then you just want it as is with a bit of extra stuff, you can throw some limiters on here, do a little bit of parallel compression, and then just limit the hell out of it, and you're good to go. But if you're like me, you're like, I find that just kind of destroys my mix a little bit, and I'm not really too keen on that. Then I just add more tracks for parallel compression to accomplish the same goal, but then turn down the overall volume, essentially going to the two bus, you know what I mean, kind of deal. So, and you're not seeing it there. It's basically on the main bus here. Okay, that's where you see me drop it down, going to the two bus by 10 dB. Okay, done deal. There it is, the mastering process. Basically, bring your track in, make sure that it's at a relative volume. Okay, should look something like that. You can see there's no clipping, none. You see that? There's no clipping on this waveform at all, anywhere. It's just loud. It's very loud. Okay, turn it down. Set up your parallel buses here with widening, with something to do high end and something to do a bit more beefing up in the mid range and the low end. Okay, whatever sort of plugins you want to use or analog gear, if you have that to do it, get it done. Of course, you're going to add a couple more things. This is dynamics control for me. Basically, prevent the clipping situation and then compress it a bit more. And really, this compressor acts almost as like an EQ. So you can just start cranking some of these functions here. The fast just adds an absolute ridiculous amount of top end to your mix and stuff like that. So again, it's sort of a dual sort of pronged instrument that I use to get the preferred sound, if you will. Nice. I didn't even know that happened. So there's that. But, you know, listen, as far as the LUFS thing is, mine's at basically, when I ran this before, it sits around minus 11 LUFS. Okay. So a CD in the old days was about minus 9. Mine's at minus 11. And trust me, this mix will take your head right off. Which is 3 dB higher than what they say that you should be mastering at with respect to Spotify. Ignore all that garbage. Just mix and master as necessary. They're going to normalize your music anyway, so don't worry about it. I've seen that so many times. But the thing is don't get chasing this LUFS number, the integrated. Listen to your mix. Listen to a reference mix. If they sound relative, you're good, and this number doesn't really matter. Now, listen, if this is like minus 15, you got a problem. If you're at minus 4, you got a problem. It should be somewhere between probably minus 12 LUFS and probably minus 9. Somewhere in there is going to be the sweet spot, and then you're good to go. Now, you can see in certain instances, I start peaking and it starts turning red. It will almost peak here on the 2 bus and it turns red. No big deal. Trust me, nobody cares, and it doesn't actually make a difference to the sound. That's just snare hits and stuff like that I don't want to totally destroy with my clipper here, right? I don't care if the highest aspect of the snare hit actually gets, peaking the 2 bus, because it's not going to make any difference whatsoever in the big picture. So I used to get real anal retentive with that. I'm like, oh no, it's peaking. It doesn't matter. Trust me. I've seen so many mixers just drive it into the red. They're like, I don't care. As long as it sounds good, that's all that matters. Remember, keep a very close eye on this gain reduction and stuff like that. If you're getting into like anything beyond minus 3 dB is way excessive. I'm talking a tiny bit, maybe minus 1 dB, minus 2 max. If you're doing like a huge amount of clipping or any kind of reduction like that, you're doing it wrong. You got it wrong. You got to go back to the mix stage and you got to get it done up properly that way. And of course, same thing here. If you're having to drive the threshold and stuff like that to an extreme, you're doing it wrong. Okay? What you should be doing is just dialing in a bit of the threshold and then really tweaking the ratio and your output if necessary. But really, it's the ratio is going to be the biggest factor. And the nice thing is with this one, it comes with this sidechain compression, if you will, and sort of frequencies to let you fine tune how the compressor reacts to the sound and whatnot. So this is absolutely a game changer kind of deal, and can make a massive difference in how your mix sounds. So again, another reason why I really love this plugin is just because it just has so many levels, if you will, to really control your mix. If you want to add some more stuff, boom, you want some VCA clip, done. You can do it there too. But for me personally, obviously I have a dedicated clipper, so I don't really need it. So that's basically the whole mix thing, is just get everything basically set up in parallel, dial in the volumes necessary to make sure that you're hitting each one of these instruments in the appropriate levels so you're getting it to work properly. Then adjust the output volumes, balance the entire sort of set of them, however many you're doing, if it's 1 or 2 or 3. In this case, I've got 4, right? And then finally bring it in here to your 2 bus, clip it, compress it as necessary. Notice I'm using 2 different types of compressors here. This one for low end, this one for the overall mix. So there's a couple different ways of doing it. And I was going to use like this sort of 1176 one, this purple, which is also really nice, but this one has way more levels of control. Way more, which is why it's on here. You want things that have insane levels of control, because the slightest bump or subtraction anywhere in this process can make such a fundamental difference. Just one click in one direction or another can be the thing that take it from being like, yeah, it sounds pretty good, to being like God tier. Trust me. So be very exacting and stuff like that. Come up with a decent methodology to mix in the proper order. Are you going to do the mid first? You're going to do side first, blah, 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 and all the rest of that stuff. You got to kind of figure out your own situation. Have mitigating strategies. In this case, obviously, look at, I'm absolutely dropping it by like whatever, 67, whatever this number actually means, at 50 hertz. To suck out so much of the low end of this compressor here, to make it not compete with the massive low end bump I'm doing here in terms of the low boost on this other channel, which I'm driving way more. You see what I mean? Like, I just needed whatever the je ne sais quoi flavor is of this compressor to beef up what I'm already doing here. So this was first, and I was like, it's good, but if I turn it up more, bad. What do? Yeah, of course. Basically drop this compressor on, drop it way down in the mix, and then split the job between 2 different instruments or whatever. This compressor, the 2 compressors, really, they're both compressors. And again, notice that's 3 compressors all on the same track. So again, I'm not doing 3 different EQs or whatever else it is, even though I have 2 different EQs. Plus, you could say that the mastering EQ, or the master compressor, has its own sort of form of EQ. So again, you're not really sort of limited to just basically using sort of the standard EQ stuff. You can use compression, modern compression and stuff like that to accomplish the exact same goals. In a lot of ways, you'll get better results, because again, you can break them up and then compress in the various frequency ranges and then just dial it in perfectly. Absolutely perfectly. Look at slow attack here. Fast attack over here, right? Medium size release over here. Fast release over here. That stuff makes a huge difference. I'm barely compressing at all here on the mid, and I'm driving it pretty hard on the side over here. Again, these are things that I didn't quite understand for a very long time and seriously hurt my mixes. So once you get it all done, you'll have a pretty tight sounding mix. And of course, just test it in the car against some other reference tracks that are relative to what you're doing. And if they sound pretty close, there it is. Masters done. Remember, it's time in the trenches. Your first 20 masters are going to be okay. And then the 30th one will be pretty good. And the 50th one will be like professional. So you just got to keep your head down, keep working on it, keep refining your system, right? That's the point. Keep refining the system. That might mean changes to various plugins here or whatever it is that you're using. Oh, I don't like this one here. I don't want to use this EQ. I want to use a different EQ. You jump down into your EQ section. Like, okay, I'm going to use this Audio Soma one instead, right? Which is another EQ that you can use because you're like, this one sounds better, and there's a whole bunch of them kind of deal. This is also, a mastering grade sort of EQ. So you see what I'm getting at there? This stuff makes a huge difference comparably to what it is exactly that you want to accomplish. So in this case, I'm using the Mag specifically because it has this airband that is, I would say, kind of like an industry standard, if you will. But it's not the only one. You know what I mean? And for this case, all I wanted it for was this huge top-end boost. I just made adjustments here as necessary because it just made it sound that much better. There it is. Video's done. I wish you guys all the best of luck. Just keep working on stuff. Don't get too wrapped around the axle about it. And at the end of the day, it's a learning process, and eventually you'll get there. Trust me, my mixes from 5 years ago were absolutely horrendous. My mix that I just made yesterday with respect to this thing sounds as good as anything that you're going to hear professionally. And it just took a shit ton of work, and that's just it. Enjoy the grind, if you will, so that you really sort of feel a sense of accomplishment when you actually accomplish what needs to get done. And then from there on out, bada bing, bada boom, Bob's your uncle. Done. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate every single one of you guys. We'll see you in the next one.